research then from some studies that really talk about social determinants of health and the impact on clinical trials. Delighted to have with us here today Dr. Luther Clark, who's a Deputy Chief Patient Officer at Merck. Got some really interesting research to share with everybody today. So we're going to hear from Dr. Clark first. Then we're going to hear from Lily Valletta, who is going to talk about the implications of clinical trials without diversity, equity, or inclusion. And she is the CEO and co-founder of Culture Intel, which is really a great group. She'll talk a little bit about what they're doing, but with her pharma background, just really incredible work that they're doing there as well. We also have with us today Lorena Curie, who's the head of diversity strategy at BMS, Bristol Myers Squibb, who is going to talk about some of the current pharma-led initiatives around health equity that are going on right now with that organization. And I think just really, again, I think fascinating work that's happening and is really going to help take us to a different place right now. And then finally, we have Dana Dorn-Seife, who is going to be founder and CEO of Lazarex Foundation, who again is going to talk about removing barriers to patient access to clinical trials from the patient perspective and really give us some insight on that as well. So really excited about this panel and incredible group that we have with us today. Again, I want to encourage you to put your chat questions in, your Q&A questions in the box as much as possible, and we'll get to those questions as soon as we can. Sarah, if we could go back up to the top here, I want to just quickly go through a couple of points for those of you who aren't familiar with the eHealth Initiative Foundation. We are a very small profit here in Washington, D.C., working hard on innovation and technology in care. We do education, advocacy, and thought leadership. You flip to the next slide there. And we work with organizations across the country, across a spectrum of healthcare, labs, payers, life sciences, patient advocacy groups, vendors, all different groups that are trying to figure out how to work together across healthcare to improve care. And we know a lot of innovation has been going on in the last 9-10 months with the COVID crisis. So we've been trying to highlight those as much as possible. Here, the next slide. And the issues that we work on, really trying to highlight best practices, are around privacy for healthcare, virtual care, social determinants of health, and across the board, COVID-19. What are best practices in education right now happening around COVID-19 that involve innovation and technology? And so much important work is happening right now. We want to try to clue you in as much as possible and as quickly as possible, because we think transferring this knowledge is important. Next slide. So we have a lot of forums and webinars, and we are a nonprofit, so these are all available to you free of charge. So I want to encourage you to visit our resource center on the ehidc.org. Again, all of these programs featuring experts from around the nation talking about what's going on right now with COVID, telehealth policy, how to get paid, clinical trials are being developed, all sorts of information. Again, I encourage you to pull up some of these programs and share them with your colleagues and friends. Also, a tremendous amount of reports and research are also available for you to peruse. Next slide. These are some of the reports. We've put out a couple of different reports this year looking at COVID-19, particularly around the SDOH area. We looked at guiding principles for the ethical use of social determinants of health data. We also did a pretty significant report supporting American Indian and Alaskan Native communities that are combating COVID-19 earlier this year. Some really great work and great examples of how this is happening right now. And I encourage you to pull those up and take a look at them. Next slide. We do have some programs coming up over the next 2 weeks. We've got a great program next week looking at patient engagement during the pandemic and different ways that organizations are trying to engage patients right now. And I encourage you to sign up for that as well. We have a series of programs looking at virtual care and social determinants of health the week of January 26th to 28th. At our virtual meeting. And then February 3rd, we're going to be talking about how to scale this all and some best practices. So programs, again, free for you to sign up and join. Next slide. Quick housekeeping, again, that Q&A box there at the bottom is where we'd like you to put your questions in. If you have specific questions for the panelists today as they go through their slides, please type those in there, because that will allow everybody in the program to see what your questions are, what's being asked, and help us organize the answers as well. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we encourage your comments as well. If you have personal experiences that you want to share, we encourage you to put your comments and thoughts in those boxes as well down in the Q&A. Next slide. And finally, as I mentioned, we are a very tiny nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. So most of our educational programs, we need the support of partners like Merck and Bristol Myers Squibb to help underwrite a lot of our educational programs. So I do want to thank them today for really helping us provide this information to everybody out there, and doing it in a really neutral way and allowing us to do that. So thank you to both those organizations for helping. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to start with the panelists today. And as I mentioned first, we are going to start with Dr. Clark from Merck. Let me go to the next slide there. Okay, we already saw the agenda there. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and hide myself and turn it over to you, Dr. Clark. Thanks for joining us, and delighted that you're here. So if you want to go ahead and kick it off.
Great. So thank you so much, Jen. And it's indeed a pleasure to be a part of today's panel addressing such an important and timely issue. I'll be speaking with you briefly about the impact of social determinants of health on clinical trial participation and diversity. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic is now more than a year old, yet it continues to be a major healthcare crisis globally, and one that has disproportionately caused suffering in communities of color, both death and suffering. However, the pandemic has highlighted longstanding healthcare disparities and has also amplified the importance of participation of the impacted communities in research and the development of healthcare solutions, not only for COVID-19, but for new therapies in general. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, when the impacted community participates in the research, it means that they not only contribute to advancing the science, they also contribute to the development of healthcare solutions, which are necessary for advances in care that lead to improved health outcomes and equity. Now, engaging communities is particularly important, and this is even more effective when it is done in an ongoing manner and when it occurs prior to the need to recruit for a particular clinical study. Next slide, please. The participant barriers to clinical trial diversity are well known. These include mistrust, fear, lack of comfort with the clinical research process, logistical constraints such as time, out-of-pocket expenses, access to transportation, the lack of awareness or information about clinical trial, and the social determinants of health. Now, the social determinants of health refer to the conditions in which people are born, live, grow, work, and entertain. And these include such factors as education, economic stability, the neighborhood in which they live, access to health and health care, the social and community context, all of which may negatively impact the decision of patients to participate in research. Therefore, it's very important that we recognize and understand the social determinants, as these may help address and overcome barriers to participant diversity, as well as improve the development of healthcare solutions and patient outcomes. Next slide, please. Social and economic conditions can negatively impact both the willingness and the ability of individuals to participate in research. Some examples of that are shown on this slide. In terms of economic stability, racial and ethnic minorities frequently experience higher economic instability, and therefore implicit costs such as transportation, childcare, parking, loss of income from missing work can all lead to low participation. Regarding education, we know from a number of studies that individuals with low levels of education may find the information about research trials and the informed consent to be complex and difficult to understand. Regarding the neighborhood and the built environment, an individual's environment, such as the availability of transportation, access to healthcare, the proximity to academic medical centers and research sites may also limit the ability to participate. In terms of healthcare access, and insurance coverage, know that these have often been given as reasons for some participants to refuse to participate. And then finally, the social and community context in which individuals live. The long history and legacy of discrimination in minority communities have led to mistrust and suspicion of both the healthcare systems and of research itself. Next slide. So given that the social and economic determinants may not only impact and contribute to healthcare disparities, but may also negatively impact one's ability and willingness to participate in research, how should they be addressed? And what are examples of some of the solutions? On the left-hand side of the slide are the economic conditions. And just to review briefly, these include economic stability, education, the neighborhood and built environment in which people live, access and availability of healthcare, the effects of discrimination, the digital divide, which has become increasingly important during the COVID-19 pandemic, both for healthcare itself as well as clinical research. And then finally, the social and cultural context. So what might be some examples of how we might address these and solutions, keeping in mind that these are certainly not exhaustive or comprehensive? Beginning at the top and going clockwise. Effective and meaningful community engagement, collaborations, and partnerships are critically important for addressing all of the social determinants, particularly those that relate to education, increasing awareness, and building trust. We can leverage real-world data to improve site selection, participant, and workforce diversity. In this case, workforce diversity referring to the diversity of the clinical site teams that are conducting the research and that have the most contact with participants during the course of the study. Policy initiatives, particularly those that address disparities and reduce out-of-pocket costs. Many of you on this call may be aware that the COVID-19 relief package that was approved by the US Congress in December included a Clinical Treatment Act, which among other things requires that Medicaid cover routine costs of care for patients participating in clinical research. You may also be aware that one of the 4 major priorities of the incoming Biden and Harris administration is racial equity. So hopefully this will create significant opportunities for us to address the issues which we're discussing here today. In terms of the digital divide, it's important to keep in mind that digital accessibility refers to not only access to digital capabilities, but also digital literacy, and each of these should be addressed. There should be increased screening and collection of social determinants data. If the data is not collected, it cannot be analyzed, it cannot be understood, and it certainly cannot be addressed. Addressing logistical barriers, such as safe and affordable transportation options, as well as others. And interestingly, transportation itself is actually one of the determinants that is perhaps most frequently recognized and addressed by the clinical sites. And then finally, communications, education, and training programs must be health literate and culturally appropriate. Next slide, please. So I'd like to end this brief discussion by highlighting once again the critical importance and the power of patient and community engagement support the participation of diverse populations in clinical research, especially as it relates to forming relationships, developing sustained partnerships, training, awareness, and education support, and importantly, the building of trust. Next slide. So, in summary, achieving diversity, inclusion, and health equity in clinical research and across the spectrum of care needs to be prioritized. Recognition and understanding of the social determinants of health will help address and overcome barriers to minority participation in research and improve the development of healthcare solutions and patient outcomes. Community partnerships and collaborations play critical roles in achieving effective and sustainable success. It's important that we collect insights from patients and community because insights about what matters to patients and their communities are especially helpful for increasing awareness, education, and building trust. So thank you, and I will turn it back over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. And I'm really pleased to see lots of comments and questions coming in through the Q&A box. So we will get to as many of those as possible as soon as we're done here. I'm going to turn it over to Lily Valletta now. Thank you for coming. We're excited to see you, Lily. Let's pull up Lily's slide. And again, any questions or comments you have during the presentations, please put them in the box there and we will get to them all.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see me?
Yes.
Excellent. You know, this era of everything digital, we got to triple check so to make sure we're all connected. So thank you for this opportunity. Dr. Clark, thanks for the context. It's always great to hear that clinical perspective, right, in the background that gets us to this dialogue. And I guess as the business gal in today's discussion and a former corporate executive turned now business owner and entrepreneur, I'm going to give you a different take on what it means from a business standpoint and really the impact or the return on inclusion that comes with clinical trial diversity. Because at the end of the day, you know, all of these companies that are doing very good for society also have commitments and responsibilities, as you know, to their shareholders, to staying profitable so we can reinvest into the research and do better breakthroughs for the future generations. It all is one big story. So with that said, I wanted to maybe challenge the room a bit to realize that there are some fundamental trends and shifting forces in the market that brings us to this moment in history. COVID-19, the disparities we're watching, the rallying cry for equity, the need for clinical trial diversity are not new things. We've known in our industry, we've needed them because there was a lot of stuff already in motion. It just happens to be that a pandemic put it on hyperdrive. And here it is why. So I want you to remember 4 things that kind of set the case for action for clinical trial diversity. And maybe this will help you see your own plans and even how we articulate these priorities differently depending on the audience that you're talking to. So here we go with number one. In case you didn't know, we are a fast approaching majority minority nation. In fact, by the year 2040, roughly, we will hit that tipping point. So those of you that work in research, we know under normal circumstances how long it takes to develop a new compound or drug or breakthrough. And if this is the face of the patients that we will serve with whatever it is that you're working on today, that maybe we'll see the market in 3, 5, or 10 years from now, we got to make sure that we are ready for that new face of America that is already a reality in many places across the nation. Because unless we do that, we know it very well. This is a very in-tune audience. The safety and efficacy profile of those solutions may not integrate those that are the majority of patients we want to impact and serve. But you don't have to wait until 2040 to get to that, moment in history of majority minority, because today, as you see here, across the largest DMAs, 4 of those most populous states have already reached that tipping point. So just simple math, how else can I be inclusive and effective in my approach to design of trials or the development of breakthrough solutions that are relevant for all, unless I take this into consideration? Now, mega trend number 2, which many of you probably know, but it's a good reminder, is the fact that, as we know, diverse segments of the population are disproportionately affected by chronic disease. This is a bit of an eye chart, but I love it. Kind of summarizes for Latino health and African-American health a lot of the conditions that we know are comorbidities that impact greatly the cost of healthcare, access, outcomes, and of course, what we're seeing during COVID. And no wonder we are seeing 2 times higher death rates amongst these groups and 4 times the hospitalization rates. Now, what does this mean? So again, back to the cultural or health economics of this rallying cry, those segments that are driving all the growth of our population are growing also more disproportionately affected by chronic disease. Therefore, we have to prioritize solutions and science that anticipates this compounding effect, because in plain demographics as well as outcomes here, we are growing into an unhealthier nation. So it doesn't matter how much access or policy or maybe Medicare for all is launched, unless we tackle this at the personal and cultural levels, it will continue to grow because of the sheer numbers and demographic shifts. Now, here's what's very interesting, and to some folks, depending on the audience that I'm talking to, get a bit concerned and scared with this fact. We know before COVID that value-based medicine or value-based contracting models were, very quickly, slowly but surely becoming the new norm. Now, value-based contracts with risk, according to the experts, are probably 3 to 5 years away, and this based on a study of last year. But when you kind of double click and look into the aspirations of CMS, they want to have 100% of providers taking some sort of downside financial risk by 2025. Now, what has happened during COVID, as many other things that have accelerated, maybe you haven't looked under the hood of what's happening with policy, but yes, this is being accelerated during COVID, because there is now this need to really accelerate a movement that challenges how we compensate for value and not for volume. Now, why do I mention this here? So we're talking about clinical trial diversity. As we know, those breakthrough solutions and medicines that we do need to get reimbursed and therefore prove value and outcomes for are for those patients that very quickly will become the majority of our nation, that are likely, unfortunately, to have a worse outcome. And what if it was the other way around? And my trial design and my real world evidence and clinical evidence is so personalized and inclusive that I can prove value at the point of, approval of a new breakthrough drug that actually gets me in a point of advantage when it comes to having a value-based contract conversation. A lot to unravel there, but again, these are forces that are at play, and it starts all the way from the lab to the human, right? And then last but not least, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. It's today's core message. The need for clinical trial diversity is not an altruistic mission. It's what we need for science to work for all. We know this. This is the audience that understands that. because if 40% of our population is diverse and they are driving all the growth, we cannot afford to continue to have anywhere between 2 to 16% of trial participants being diverse, or we've seen that improve significantly during COVID because there's been accountability metrics, and we're hearing from the FDA commissioner a whole new language and case for action, but we still have ways to go and catch up to make this the default in inclusion. And it applies in so many areas, therapeutic areas ranging from, oncology to many others. But this one in particular was a quote that comes out of a white paper that was published as a result of aggregating 230 oncology trials and kind of seeing, gee, is it different when we look at everyone combined? And the low representation numbers were still the case, even when you looked at a combined pool of 230 trials in oncology from different sponsors and companies. This was something that the folks involved in this from Johns Hopkins said, which is a bit sobering, but it's again, rallying cry, call to action for us. If fewer than 5% of breast cancer studies were stratified by race or socioeconomic factors, fast forward to the bottom, that means I'm utilizing data derived from just one group, ignoring the rest, which by the way, are driving the majority of the growth, and typically are presenting at a later stage and have higher death rates, unfortunately. What this means, that lack of information is detrimental to survival rates. This is about lives, right? At the end of the day. So this notion of personalized medicine kind of has its limits unless we design for personalized health. And all of this does have commercial implications. Again, I am from the sector. I was 10 years in a big pharma company. I get it. We get pointed as the ones that like you and your pricing, you and your profits. We need all of that, as we know, to develop great science. It's great. I call it purposeful profits, and it's absolutely fine because that's what we need to stay innovative. But what if diversity gets in your way or path to be first to market? Now, we now know who's out in the market, right? This is nothing against Pfizer, Moderna, and the amazing results we're seeing and the many others that are in the pipeline. But this is worth recounting because back in October, the Moderna vaccine trial, as published, in the news, had to slow down. And it was prompted to kind of pause and rethink and reassess because that lack of diversity was threatening the ability to really put something out in the market that was likely to work for those groups that were more affected by the pandemic. But this is where leadership steps in. And I am so proud to kind of read to you all like a statement from the CEO that said, I'd rather have higher diverse participants and take an extra week than, rush it, which has been the case for many of us in industry to race to the launch. But now we need to pause and make that an inclusive launch because otherwise we may not have the data that all of a sudden is required as the new norm for us to prove a complete picture of efficacy and safety for the face of the new America, in this case, in the United States. So that calls for a new way to see the world. It's what we call at CIEN, we are a cultural intelligence company. We do data analytics, as you see here, to understand barriers to care because it's not a one size fits all. When we studied based on 372,000 digital discussions using our technology culture intel, what are the barriers to clinical trial enrollment? They are different. And just as much science we put into personalized medicine, this is almost personalized design, engagement, and clinical trial protocols that are made for the people that we serve. Look at this. If I just look at the first column, barrier to participation, lack of awareness, let me educate, but miss on the fact that for Black Americans and Latinos, it has to do with the HCP relationship, but the concern I have with that figure in the world of healthcare. You may be launching an engagement campaign for trial enrollment that is focused on the information and continue to be puzzled by the fact that Latinos and Black Americans are not enrolling. So we gotta flip it, we gotta understand it. It takes cultural intelligence with depth. So I'm gonna close with that. As you see, there are business implications, demographic forces we can't ignore, and even value-based contracting movement that could put us at an advantage if I am launching from day one with inclusive data that goes on the label, goes as part of my, evidence to the world that these solutions work for all. So when we think about personalized medicine, let's think about personalization at scale, because from insights to trial design, to real world evidence and commercial plans and many other things, that person at the center, unless we understand who he or she is and what those forces are in demographic shifts, we may be missing out on the critical mass of people that probably need us most. So that's it. I'm gonna close with a rallying cry, an invitation for all to show up and step up, because we do need everyone through the continuum and ecosystem of healthcare to realize that we gotta get this right, we gotta do it together, because there's no other way. Shifting demographics, incidence numbers are way too big for us not to pay attention. So thank you for giving us this forum, and congrats to everyone in this call that I know is doing great work in this space.
Lily, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I want to see some more comments and questions coming through here. We really welcome as many thoughts and anything you want to share with us today. Thank you. All right, we're going to turn it over now to Lorena Curie with Bristol Myers Squibb, who is the head of diversity strategy, and is going to talk a little bit about some of their initiatives right now.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Dr. Clark and to Lily for kind of setting up the stage on all the things that have been said and how social determinants of health, as well as cultural competency and understanding the impact that diversity has in the patient recruitment, it will bring to our science, but more importantly to all of our patients. As said, my name is Lorena Curie, and diversity in clinical trials is my full-time job. I've been in Bristol Myers Squibb collaborating with a lot of internal folks and external folks to make sure that this happens since 2019. And that makes me very proud, because we started working on this very important program even before the two pandemics that we have now been exposed to exacerbated the need of addressing this important topic. So with this, I have a couple of objectives today in mind, and if we can please move forward to the next slide. The first one would be share with you how we are understanding diversity. Next slide, please. How we are understanding diversity and why it is an enterprise priority for us. And why we are focusing today in the US specifically and in race and ethnicity. And then I would like to share a little bit about the work that we are doing within the R&D organization and elevating this internal priority with the rest of the company to show some results that over the time will be sustainable processes. It is important, unless I think that 2020 was really a good year for clinical trials. Everyone had this in their minds, and so did with diversity in clinical trials. But our intention is to make this part of our DNA and make it stick, not just a trending topic. So that's how we are going to continue working around this. And I will share a little bit about a specific case study that we have in prostate cancer, and how through community outreach efforts and leveraging the good learnings and insights, but more importantly, the appropriate message and messengers, we were able to increase the participation of Black patients in prostate cancer studies. So the next slide will just walk you all through what is diversity for us and for everyone. At Bristol Myers, we are very robust. We have a very robust, powerfully diverse and broadly inclusive culture that goes all the way from race, ethnicity, sexual orientation and gender identity, veteran status, people with disabilities, age, many different dimensions, both demographics and non-demographics, that are super important and relevant throughout the patient journey within the clinical trial or any type of treatment that a patient may go to. However, as I said before, today, yes, we need to start with race and ethnicity. And one of the reasons for that, if you can please go to the next slide, is because the right side of this slide will present you kind of a 100-year analysis of how within the US, the population is going to be shifted from majority white to majority non-white. And for those reasons, we must and we should actually make some progress on these specific 2 dimensions. As you can see, by 2016, less than 50% will be white, and a big majority is going to be Latinx or Hispanic. More importantly, the efficacy, the safety, the incidence of many diseases varies through race, by race and other demographic groups. I just want to clarify that it does not mean that we are not doing things to support other underrepresented communities. We work very close with our people and business resource group and all other stakeholders internally to make sure that all of them kind of have their voice embedded in everything that we're doing. But yes, our focus continuously will be on race for the next next year or so. The next slide, we'll just, I think that Dr. Clark and also Lily kind of showed us how the impact of clinical trial participation is not diverse as it should. And just summarizing how what Lily said before, in the US, 4 of every 10 persons belongs to a racial or ethnic minority. However, as you can see on this slide, it is very, very small, the total percentage of non-white participants in our trials. And this that I am showing right now is coming from a disease agnostic analysis across the drug trial snapshots from FDA. So imagine if this happens across all the therapeutic areas, what happens in those diseases that disproportionately affect more Black or Hispanics and still have that small participation. So for that reason, and because we need to do something, is that we are intentionally trying to eliminate those barriers that patients go through when participating in a trial. If we move to the next slide, please. This kind of also summarizes a lot of what Dr. Clark was saying during the first part of his presentation. So considering that social determinants of health would be in the bottom part of the slide, I would like to focus on the first 2 lines, on what's happening with the sponsors and with our clinical trials research sites. And I need to be very transparent. I couldn't be happier to see how all stakeholders in the industry, all large sponsors, CROs, and organizations have said, we're going to do something about it. Because this is not a problem exclusive for BMS. This happens across all the ecosystem, and we need to understand how we change it. But just to give you an example, what's happening within the sponsors' perspective, just things as simple as the eligibility criteria, how inclusion and exclusion sometimes may be disproportionately, inadvertently eliminating those patients that need to be in a trial because they have higher incidence or prevalence. Think about body mass index, cholesterol, and many other indicators that may be more prevalent in the Hispanic or in the Black or in the Asian population. Those things happen. And maybe we have been working so hard on establishing the criteria that we are overseeing those parts. And when we look at the clinical trials research sites, again, this happens all across the industry and all across the sponsors. We always go to the same sites, because the clinical operation is so robust and so strict that we have created a very robust apparatus that kind of follows the good clinical practices that we will continue to utilize and we will continue to trust and leverage. But those large academic centers and those sites are not the ones that are close to our communities. So we need to do 2 very important things in here. We need, first of all, to assure that the smaller sites and research sites that have the opportunity of become part of this operating process, at the same time that we develop inclusive behaviors in all the other sites. We need to see like what the diversity or the demographics of the staff is. I personally always feel better going to a physician that has an accent, there is data that speaks of the concordance between a patient and a physician and how it impacts the permanence and treatment. So we need to look into those things. And again, the third and the fourth slides were mentioned already by Dr. Clark and by Lily. We need to understand with the lens of the patient what they are thinking, why this mistrust still is affecting and generating some reluctancy to the medical profession, and how we can, again, as an ecosystem, put our hands together and change that perception, right? So now what I will try to share with you is the how, right? How we are addressing this important topic at BMS. And the next slide will speak a little bit about our initiative. So if you can please advance to the next, and actually the next one, thank you. Within our research and development organization across early and late development, we have put together a program, and as I said, it started back in 2019, that has as an objective to improve the recruitment of a diverse patient population, securing or assuring that it is more reflective of the real world. That means that is aligned with the epidemiology of the disease study. Of course, as I said before, this is fully in alignment with our overarching goals of providing care to patients, but it's also aligned with our sustainability objectives and is part of a broader health equity initiative that is happening as we speak. What I mentioned as well about the powerfully diverse and broadly inclusive culture that we work with has made very strong connections with our employee resource groups, people and business resource groups, and other community-based organizations that help us bring the message appropriately. But as I said before, our intention is to make everyone understand how the processes need to evolve, to consider diversity in clinical trials from design and not as an afterthought. And that's a lot of unlearn and relearn and change management that we have been working with. But the outcomes that this will bring and what we have seen so far is that, of course, it will bring opportunities to all the patients in need. It will give better data, which will provide better science, not only mentioning efficacy and safety. It will make a more inclusive culture, even beyond what we already have. But also, Lily mentioned as well, our health authorities here in the US have highlighted how important it is for us to recruit diverse population in our trials. So we're in alignment with that. And our intention as we advance in this program within the US is that step by step, we are able to spread this effort across other areas and markets. So just to provide a general perspective of how our program looks like, in the next slide, you will see our 4 initial areas of focus. It is about awareness and communication, like Lily was saying, but not only externally, also internally. It is about the materials that we bring to the patients. As said before, it's not just what we're saying, but how we are saying and who is helping us bring that message outside. It's about the data that we capture. Do we know the patient demographics already in our trials? Do we know our principal investigators' demographic? How does our eligibility criteria is looking like? And are we really considering all these variables as we deliver and create the trials? And site selection, the one that I mentioned, it is something that happens across all the ecosystem and pharma industry. We need to assure that little by little, sites are more accessible to the patients. The last slide, and please move forward, will speak to the example or the case study that we have seen as a quote-unquote success, I would say. Because what I want to share right now is how in a specific prostate cancer trial, we were able to improve the historically participation of Black patients in enrollment that was as low as 4% to a 17.7%. So that's a huge increase on percentage. And the way that we were able to do it was through strategizing the patient recruitment activities in strong collaboration with community-based organizations such as Black Health Matters or FEN, which are Black patient advocacy organizations, and bringing the appropriate message to the fraternities, to the barbershops, to the churches, with their support to make sure that we would be able to build this trust, right? But in addition to that, we were able to elevate the awareness around prostate health and clinical trial participation at the same time that the community helped us build a much more better, or I would say a better understood criteria and development for our further prostate cancer trials. So for us, this became our what good looks like, and we will not be comfortable doing less than this, especially because in prostate cancer, the incidence is 60% higher in Black patients than in whites. So that 17% looks very positive for us, but we know that there is still so much more to do. And that's what we will continue thriving and working with other partners as we move forward. And I think that is my last slide. If you can please continue to the next one, which is just a thank you, and the one that I will use to hand it over to Dana, because as said, when we talk about diversity in clinical trials, it is not a proprietary space, it is a collaborative space. And the more that we work from a enterprise perspective, community-based organization perspective, advocacy or foundation perspective, the better. So I will now hand it over to you, Dana, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome to all of you. This has been a tremendous presentation thus far. I would just like to tell you that for Lazarex Cancer Foundation, I'm waiting for my slides to come up here. Great, thank you. So Lazarex Cancer Foundation, our mission is improving patient access to cancer clinical trials, and we have been pursuing this mission now for the last 15 years. And we do this by providing clinical trial navigation services, community outreach and engagement, and we offer financial reimbursement to both patients and their caregivers to increase overall enrollment and achieve equitable access and inclusion among racial and ethnic minorities in therapeutic cancer clinical trials. Next slide, please. So these are the barriers that we address. A lack of knowledge about clinical trials. Patients can't go to clinical trials or choose to participate if they don't know about them. The financial constraints. All too often, patients are looking at their financial situation in relation to the decisions they make about participating in a clinical trial, as opposed to what's best for them, their health outcomes, and their family. And also support network interruption. 54% of the time, clinical trials are not local to a cancer patient, and it does involve travel. And so it requires that a patient leave their support network, leave their family and their friends. So Lazarex then provides financial assistance to cover the out-of-pocket travel expenses associated with clinical trial participation for the patient and for the travel companion. Then we have the historical issues, which have been presented already today, just the egregious medical abuses that have taken place, creating fear and mistrust for many communities, cultural and language, and then finally, socioeconomic barriers. Next slide, please. So these are the Lazarex programs that we have undertaken and are currently implementing. Our flagship program is the Lazarex Care program. Out of the Lazarex Care program grew our Impact program, and then out of impact grew our community impact program. And I'll just quickly take you through all three of those. So Lazarex Care is a very unstructured program with a nationwide focus. We provide clinical trial navigation, travel expense reimbursement, community outreach, and engagement services. Patients who contact us to participate in Lazarex Care, it's typically self-referral of patients who have failed standard of care, who are looking for clinical trial opportunities to stay engaged in their fight with cancer. And our deliverables with Lazarex Care are increased enrollment and diversity and equitable access to cancer clinical trials. With our impact program, we realized that we could carry on daily with our care program, but we weren't really changing anything. And we really wanted to focus on that transformation of bench to bedside in relation to clinical trial enrollment and diversity. So impact was developed. It is a very structured program with institutional focus and has very specific activities that we undertake at the institutional level to improve enrollment and diversity. The patient referral is done by the healthcare professional during the clinical trial consent process, introducing the financial reimbursement program to the patient at the time that they are considering participating in the clinical trial. We also have a community outreach and engagement piece within our impact program. And again, the deliverables are increased enrollment and diversity and equitable access. We realized, so this kind of gives you a snapshot of the progression of our gaining and understanding of what it really takes to improve cancer health outcomes and create equitable access. Are we done yet? We don't know, but our goal is to find out. And by going through the actions with our care and our impact program, what we realized is that we were doing a really good job of engaging with and interfacing with patients who are already connected to or considering participating in the clinical trial process. The real challenge is out in the community with those community members who are not already engaged. And that's the genesis behind our community impact program. Community impact is currently, the pilot study is underway in Philadelphia. It is a highly structured program with specific geographic focus on, we're currently operating in West Philadelphia in some of the poorest African-American Black neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And what we've done is we've assessed the social determinants of cancer. We've identified and characterized cancer disparities within the communities where we're working in relation to incidence, prevalent risk, and mortality. And our community impact program has really given us the opportunity to have a gateway into the most at-risk communities. We've created a baseline so we can go back and measure our success. We've created an action strategy, and our efforts are place-based, community-led, and culturally appropriate. And our outcomes with the community impact program are really focused on improving cancer health outcomes and disparities, and again, creating equitable access. Out of all of this work now, we have a new program that is just being launched called the Cancer Wellness Hub. The Cancer Wellness Hub sits in the middle of all of our programs, and we really feel like this hopefully is going to be the heartbeat of our efforts. The hub literally functions as a hub within the community, bringing together the many resources and services required to manage the cancer journey and provide the greatest opportunity for a successful results. Next slide, please. So what is the process that we go through? We are all about taking action to create transformational change. So with our impact and our care programs, our navigation and reimbursement process, we identify clinical trial opportunities for patients based on their personal history with cancer. If a patient chooses to participate in a cancer clinical trial and they are accepted into that trial and they need financial reimbursement to cover the cost of the associated travel expense, they are welcome to apply to Lazarex for reimbursement, again, for themselves and their travel companion. We take a look at their overall household income to determine the level of eligibility for the program, and we provide reimbursement based upon a sliding scale, dependent upon total household income. We then generate an agreement with every single patient, walking the patient through step by step how the program works, what they can anticipate in reimbursement, understanding what they have to do in order to be involved in the program and set realistic expectations for them. And then we provide reimbursement on a monthly basis, more often if needed, but it's important to note that we will continue to provide that monthly reimbursement for travel expense as long as a patient is actively enrolled in a cancer clinical trial. And in many instances, we follow patients from trial to trial to trial. Again, our deliverable with this program is increased enrollment and diversity and equitable access. Next slide, please. So what about the community impact process? Again, this is a new program for us with our pilot study underway in the city of Philadelphia. And we went about this by identifying the location, looking at the communities that were at greatest risk and had greatest need, creating the team, engaging with all of the key opinion leaders and stakeholders within that area to come together and get the work done, conduct the assessment, formulate the action plan, go back and engage with the community, and then go back and measure our results. And we're in the process right now of engagement with the community. We've already developed culturally appropriate messaging videos. We've done over 400 community interviews, and we really have a situation in our West Philadelphia neighborhoods where for the first time, the community is really excited about being involved and having a voice in their health future. Again, the deliverables here for the community impact program are addressing health disparities and improving health outcomes. Next slide, please. So what are our results? When we look at the impact and the care programs, you can see based on ethnicity and race, when we look at the 5-year roughly snapshot of the Lazarex Care program, you see that we were able to achieve 25% minority participation in care, which is considerably higher than the national average, which varies anywhere, it depends on which reports you read, from 5% on up to 12 or 15%. When we compare our Lazarex Care program to our institutionally oriented impact program, you see that with care, over the same time frame from January 2018 through August of 2020, we had a 23% minority participation, which is still significant. But with impact, we achieved 63% minority participation. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Oh, nope, back one. Okay, household income data. So when we look at household income data for care over the last 5 years, 31% of the participants in the care program came from households earning $25,000 or less on an annual basis. When we compare CARE to impact over the same time frame, January 2018 through August 2020, you see that with CARE, 25% of participants came from households earning less than $25,000, but with impact, 52% came from households earning less than $25,000. These are patients who clearly would not be able to consider participating in a cancer clinical trial without that financial reimbursement. Next slide, please. Again, looking at the results, when we compare our CARE reimbursements to our impact reimbursements, you can see that with our CARE program, the majority of our reimbursements revolve around flights and lodging versus impact, where the majority of our reimbursements incorporate ground transportation, gas tolls, and parking. With this structured activities that we undertake with impact at the institutional level, we find that we are engaging with patients who are more local to the comprehensive cancer centers where we have this program, and that is reflected in the overall expenditures on reimbursements. Next slide, please. Of course, for our community impact program, we will have catchment area variation. The racial and ethnic diversity will be dependent upon the local catchment areas of where we're doing our work. And just as an example, right now we're in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. You can see how the racial differential and ethnic differential shows up. And so we are tailoring our programs accordingly to accommodate the different communities where we are doing our work. Next slide. So in conclusion, while racial and ethnic diversity will be dependent upon local catchment areas, both CARE and impact data support the conclusion that universal implementation of a financial reimbursement program for travel costs is fundamental to removing a significant barrier to equitable access and increasing cancer clinical trial diversity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. I'm going to ask everybody to pull up their screens here so we can all see each other and get to a couple of questions here. We do have a lot of questions, so any questions we do not get to today, we will send around some answers as well. And I encourage you to look at the Q&A box and the answered questions, because there are many there. So Dr. Clark, first question for you. There have been a lot of comments about transparency. Just, you shared really interesting data in terms of COVID-19, and I'm just curious, how transparent do you feel like we've been to date around the COVID-19 vaccination development? Do you feel like people understand the numbers here in terms of the development? Just what are your initial thoughts?
I think there has been. I think there's been a lot of scrutiny. There's been a lot of collaboration among the companies that are developing the vaccines. And as it relates to today's topic around diversity in clinical trials, certainly the initial two vaccines that were approved in this country, there's a lot of focus on making sure that they were they had appropriate representation of the target populations for whom the vaccines would be used. I would add to that, though, that one of the important reasons to have participation by those who will be the intended users of the therapy is not only to assess the efficacy and the safety, but also to build confidence and comfort in the treatment. And I think that as we sort of read in the lay press, there is some skepticism in some groups about the vaccines because of the speed at which they've been developed in part. And I think a lot of that may be due to just a lack of understanding as to the process and the fact that all the appropriate safety and usual precautions that are involved in rigorous clinical research were adhered to. It was just an accelerated process.
Lorena, I don't know if you want to piggyback on that, make any comments.
The only comment I would say is for clinical trial, again, there was a lot of attention. So right now, everyone has an opinion. I would definitely recommend that people look into scientific publications instead of just news feeds that appear in social media over and over, because that is what actually is bringing more credibility to the work. The other thing I would say is I've never seen the industry collaborate so closely with health authorities and with sponsors and vendors and everyone as I have seen it now. And the last thing is I do expect and I do hope that all the disruptions that COVID has brought into the clinical trials operations overall help us go back to something better once everything kind of goes back to whatever it's going to go back.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Dana, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, so, we've really seen kind of the silver lining around COVID in relation to clinical trials, participation, decentralization of clinical trials, and our patients have really benefited by that. We're seeing that, we have reduced burden, we have, reduced stress on patients participating in trials, reduced exposure to be immunocompromised, during this COVID period, a reduction in expense associated with clinical trial participation, not just for the patient, but in conducting cancer clinical trials in general. We're all, less lost work time, so this is really teed up an opportunity for us to really increase access for cancer patients to cancer clinical trials and expand the network of medical individuals who are involved in the process.
We've got kind of a great question from one of the participants today about, a lot of this comes down to kind of money and investment in research. And, how would you describe the amount of willingness on the part of both, I would say, some of these large corporations to kind of spend money on addressing these barriers to diversity in clinical trials? I mean, you guys are certainly a great testament to the fact that this is happening, but Dana, maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so we have really, as an organization, been the beneficiary of this tremendous, not focus on and genuine interest in really addressing health disparities and achieving better health outcomes and creating equitable access. I really feel that, we have tremendous momentum we're gaining, right, in moving the needle on these challenges. And, for the first time since 2006 that I've been in the patient advocacy arena, there's a genuine commitment to get the job done. My hope is that we do not revisit this 20 years from now or when the next pandemic occurs. We have to capitalize on the situation and what we've learned in order to really, maintain these advantages that we've created as a result of COVID.
And Dr. Clark, same question to you. I mean, have you seen a shift in terms of willingness to invest in these types of things? And what do you think accounts for that? Was it COVID-19 or just were companies moving in this direction?
Sure. No, I think what you've heard from several of the presentations today is the importance of supporting participants financially to the extent that being in a clinical trial does not cost them and that they're not out-of-pocket expenses. And I think the work that the Lazarus Cancer Foundation is doing has been a great example of how we approach that. The thing that I would share with you, though, is the conduct of clinical trials is very highly regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the aspects of the regulation is what can be reimbursed, what can be paid. And there's this balance, I guess, that comes up between what's appropriate and what might be interpreted as coercion. So I think that what has happened with COVID-19 is really a great appreciation of some of these issues. And one of the comments that I made, for example, just the coverage of usual care, which varies a lot by different states and settings. And in the COVID-19 relief bill, there's this provision that requires, Medicaid to cover the routine care that patients have if they're participating in a clinical trial. I mean, conditions that should be taken care of or are treated anyway. So that's kind of a silver lining, but that requirement doesn't take effect until 2022. But I think we all recognize that any out-of-pocket costs, particularly those that may not be anticipated or expected, can be a real barrier or burden to patients. And you'd like to eliminate those. In terms of how you do it most effectively, I think is what we're still struggling with.
So Lorena,
Jen, could I do a follow-up to that?
Sure.
So Lazarex, we really recognized the whole issue around coercion and inducement, several years back when we started to implement our impact program. That was a recurring theme for the biopharma companies we approached for funding to do impact. So we said, okay, if we can address the issues of coercion and inducement and remove those, right? Would you consider supporting these efforts?
Yeah.
100% said yes. Some were red flags, some were, or let's say proceeding with caution, right? So we set out to do just that. And we approached the FDA asking to separate paying or compensating a patient for clinical trial participation versus reimbursing travel expense and out-of-pocket expense, right? Because one is enrichment, the other is simply creating a platform of parity. And our whole goal was to try and create a more permissible environment. So we were successful in engaging with the FDA, and they published new guidance language around permitting reimbursement of out-of-pocket expense. And we've also undertaken state legislation. We have successfully passed legislation in 6 states now, again, creating this permissible environment, allowing the reimbursement of out-of-pocket travel expense. And that also gives the IRBs some security and protection around participating in our programs as well.
Mm-hmm. What needs to happen next, Lorena, in terms of helping, how can clinicians, hospitals, payers, what, I guess, concrete steps can people outside of the industry do to support this diversity?
That's a very broad question. And I think that everyone, at least everyone who is in this webinar right now, has something to do. And that is just going back to whichever role you have and whomever leadership team you're interacting with, ask them, what are we doing to support this? Definitely, it's not in our plans that this is just like 2020, 21 flavor of the month. We do wish that everything that's happening right now becomes sustainable, right? I am working towards the objective of, I hope that my role doesn't exist in the future anymore. No, I do want to work, but that would be all of us. I would say goal. You would see there's this core team and an interaction between all of the people which in the industry are working around this same topic, continuously sharing what works, what does not work, what best practice we should replicate. really, this is a very collaborative space, and hopefully it just came here to stay. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Sure. And perhaps if I could add to that, I think that's really a great comment. And you know, a general truth, I believe, is that, you know, what we're all interested in is making sure that new therapies are effective and safe in the people and the patients who will be using them. And we know that there are occasions where, you know, response and safety are different. So that it's important to have a representative group in the studies that are being done. And their responsibilities and opportunities for all of the stakeholders. And I think that as was really shown nicely in a couple of the presentations, on particular Lorena's, you know, that there are multiple barriers, but there are also multiple stakeholders that are involved in this particular process, all of whom have opportunities and I would say responsibilities to you know, support you know, diversity in the clinical research that is being done. But it's not, I think as Lily pointed out, it's not, you know, one size fits all, because, you know, the circumstances do vary depending on the disease, the community, and the patients. The one thing that I would say, though, in terms of the issue that we're addressing today around social determinants of health, you know, we've spoken about the costs and the difficulties there, but also things such as, you know, putting sites and investigators in the communities,
Yeah.
I think address a number of the barriers that we've spoken about, so that, you know, patients and potential participants who are impacted by these social determinants don't have to travel out of that community to get to the clinical site.
Can you
Because
talk
that's-
about that a little bit, Dr. Clark? Because we've heard that from a number of people, the importance of that. And can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think there are a couple of things that have evolved during COVID. I think that, as several of us said, you know, because of the fact that you know, we're more shut in, so issues of digital and virtual and remote and telemedicine have become much more you know, important. So we're learning more how to do that. But as we think about and approach it, you know, there is this what many refer to as the digital divide. So that's one aspect of it. The other, though, that we've always known that you will enhance and increase participation if you relieve the burden of participation that patients face. And one of those burdens is having to travel to, be at sites, and certainly go out of one's community. So to the extent that you can have sites in the community where you not only have clinical site teams that would likely be more reflective of that community, more trusted, more able to communicate and relate to them, it also relieves a significant burden to the patients getting to the sites. Now, there are obviously some studies where this is necessary that one travels, but to the extent that that burden can be reduced, it's important, and it removes a significant barrier.
So we're running out of time here, but I'd love just to get some final comments from each of you in terms of, you know, kind of a quick response. What gives you the most hope about this field right now? You know, I know we're kind of in a very concerning period for a lot of folks around this. So give us some window and to some hope and where you see this taking us. Lorena, you want to start?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I would say that for a very long time in pharma, we were all speaking about patient centricity, and that should always continue to be our focus, right? That's the work in the life science industry. But I think that now we are all aware that that is not enough, and we all should try to be the most inclusive, patient-centric companies, like in any field that we are. And we're going to do this together, no? That's what gives me hope.
Oh, that's great. Dana.
Yeah, so for the first time in history, really, thanks to COVID, you know, the general public really truly values what clinical trials are and how important they are in relation to getting new treatments and drugs to market. So 50% of our job now has been done for us because I don't have to spend 90% of my time explaining all of that, right? So that is fantastic as far as engaging with patients and other stakeholders around clinical trials. But also, I just want to say, you know, the momentum around addressing health disparities, improving diversity, the collaboration that we're seeing, honestly, for the first time, it's incredible, and I really hope that we can just keep that moving forward.
Excellent. Dr. Clark?
Sure, I would second the comments that have already been made, and I would remind the audience, one is that this is not a new problem. I mean, this is a problem that has been with us and has been a significant challenge for many, many decades. But I think given the lessons of COVID-19, given the focus and the prioritizing of issues such as diversity of participation, and given that, you know, we're all sort of singing the same tune, and even in terms of some of the policies that we're likely to see, that we now have a real opportunity to do some things that will be effective and sustainable. And it's an opportunity that we should take advantage of, because the fact that it is an opportunity does not mean that we will necessarily take advantage of it, or those changes, those innovations, the progress that is made will be sustainable. So I think, you know, sustainable progress for achieving, you know, meaningful diversity is an opportunity that we now have. And hopefully we will not only take advantage of it, but we will make progress, and there will be differences that will be sustained. And I think, as Lorena said, so that this will not be an issue that we have to even think about going forward.
That's all very positive, and I really want to thank each of you for giving us some positive thoughts to end a rough week here. And thank everybody for joining us here today. We are going to be sharing a copy of the recording of the program today. Some of the slides will be available later this afternoon on our website, ehidc.org. And I want to thank our really stellar group of panelists today, and Lily as well, who I know had to drop off a little bit early. But thank you, all of you, for joining us for this really important conversation and discussion. And we appreciate all of your work, Dr. Clark, Lorena, Dana, Lily, that you're doing right now in this area. You know, really noble, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work. Thank you for your work, and thank you for joining us. And everybody have a wonderful afternoon and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.